Hey guys, this is Abby. I am the CEO of Liquid Labs, and this is going to be a bit more of a raw series where I will be going over what exactly we are building at Faro, why we're building it, why we decided to go down this pathway, and also discuss like what's coming up. I think we've been super heads down building. Um, and I thought it was time that we start explaining some of the stuff that we're doing, what the vision is for us, what we are seeing, what's changed over the past year in the market that is enabling us to build what we are building now that hasn't been possible ever before. So, to set some context, I think what has really changed over the past year is two major verticals have gotten to the point where they can actually be offered to consumers. So one of them is on-chain markets. We saw this with Hyperliquid. Hyperliquid bought perps in a way that actually rivaled centralized exchanges. We have never seen that before. That's unprecedented. And that trend continued. We have players like Lido competing in a different way at the same level. We've seen Lido integrate with Robinhood. A couple of years ago, that would have been insane. But nowadays, we sort of take these things for granted. And I think we're finally at a stage where we see that on-chain markets stop becoming a way for crypto natives to access financial markets and rather become a way for financial markets to actually be expressed and exist in an environment that sits at the same UX level as what you would get within a Robinhood app or within an interactive broker's account. Like, it's no longer just this sort of niche thing where, okay, how do we access this to crypto natives? Crypto natives have all this money because they bought in early. And how do we tap that market versus it's like, okay, there's now like fundamental reasons why if we do this on chain, there are benefits. Users can custody tokens, they can tokenize stocks, you can LP them, you can borrow against them, all in a way that makes the sourcing and aggregating of capital much more decentralized, but also the rules of on-chain finance are laid out. Like, there's smart contracts, you can read the smart contracts, and I think we see this scaling exponentially. And rather than on-chain finance being this niche side channel where, okay, maybe there's crypto natives, maybe there's like some parts of applications that sit on chain, we believe that this will be the fundamental way that all things execute. And it's like, in my opinion, it's the only way that global finance can execute, because global finance requires some level of trust minimization between nations, and ultimately, I think this is where blockchain comes into it. So that's one vertical. The second vertical is AI. What we have seen with LLMs, models, and harnesses over the past couple years that AI has really been kicking off is that, one, more recently, open source models have caught up, which is a big signal, because what we saw with private AI labs is that, okay, maybe this thing is too expensive for the everyday consumer to use. But with open source models catching up, I think what we will see is the commoditization of inference. And actually, what will happen is that value accrual won't actually sit in the model. I think at the end of the day, private and public models will converge through one way or another, either through, this could happen multiple ways. It could be, private models are ahead, but the progress in private models slows to the point where open source models, through methods like distillation, eventually catch up, and then things are equal. And so I really see the differential between private and public models as being as like, okay, at what pace can private models be better than public models? And I think that is going to be a decreasing trend over time. And eventually what we'll see at the end of the day is private and public models converge to the same intelligence, which means that the ability for the actual model itself to be a business model goes away. And then the business model shifts to, I think, what we've been seeing called as the harness around it. And that's sort of where Faro is. And it's the big bet that we're taking is that, okay, forget the model, assume the model is something. How do you construct an application that is able to utilize any model to bridge the gap between a user and financial markets? And what has to fit into that, whether it's data or tooling, such that while the user is interacting with Faro, at the end of the day, like what we want for the end user is that through the construction of building these pieces of data and tooling at the smallest, I guess, atomic level, what you can do is use AI, not you use it for its intelligence, but I think where its real value sits is in the orchestration and organization of tools and pieces of context, such that the end resulting application is not a brand application, but it is the terminal for that single user to interface with on-chain financial markets. And that's the big thing that we're building. We sort of went back to first principles and we said, okay, so in this new world of AI, there's going to be an ever increasing amount of data as the iterations and frequency of interactions with the world is increasing. Like with, before you had, okay, maybe a user would, super simple example, right? A user wants to invest some money. Today, they invested into an index fund because, okay, the S&P 500 is this index. It's returned, whatever 9% historically for the past 100 years. And so all the users interact through the S&P 500 with the financial market, and there's like this passive investing, and they say, okay, this is something that has worked. And so there's really only, one single interaction with the financial market through the S&P 500 index. And then behind that, you have all these users who subscribe to this one methodology that has been a middle of the bell curve distribution for all of these users, versus the future, which is where we think things are going, where it's like, okay, you should be able to talk to an LLM and say, okay, here are my risk preferences. I have 3 kids. We have this much left on our home loan. I have this much spare cash every month. Build me a data-backed index that I could be buying that is going to fit my specific financial goals, and not even financial goals. My risk preferences, my ability to tolerate things like volatility, and all of these things are super personal pieces of context and information that, in my opinion, they will break index funds. They will break the need for financial advisors. I think financial advisors will still be important. I'm not saying AI is going to replace everything, but it is like, okay, you have this incredibly intelligent, and in the open source world, hopefully unbiasable piece of intelligence that you can give your life context to in a also hopefully private setting. And so by doing that, you're able to manufacture the outcomes that you want. And yeah, this is just so exciting to us. I feel like what we're building with Faro is really just like the first innings of realizing this vision of empowering the end individual to finally be able to represent their own desires for the world in the way they interact with financial markets. All of this before has been, either outsourced to a fund manager who, I'm not saying there's bad fund managers, but the fund manager has their own risk profile and personality that is going to impact the way that they manage the money. And while you as a user may sit in the bell curve that determines that financial manager as a sort of good fit for you, it's ultimately not the perfect fit. And we just don't have to do that anymore. And so, yeah, what we're building at Faro is the first iteration of this. Faro is built on top of Hyperliquid. We aggregate and pull in all of this data from all different types of sources directly from Hyperliquid. It's really on a per asset basis. Like, we work quite closely with Glassnodes on BTC data, as if you sort of go back and look at, what has actually driven BTC cycles, what has actually driven the BTC price, you can sort of boil a lot of that down to, how do all of these agents in the BTC network interact with each other? What are these? By agents, I mean people. There could be agents as well. Probably will be agents in the future. You have all of these long-term holders. What are they doing? You have these short-term holders. What are they doing? And then, how does Bitcoin compare with the price to produce a Bitcoin? And then, if you take all this data and you aggregate it at the base layer, now you have this ever-expanding pool of data. And when I've tried to explain what we are doing, I have always come back to the same analogy where Faro is building the search engine for the agentic future, because you have this ever expanding pool of data. Let's just say in the future, Faro is tracking every single piece of data. And I think like a core principle here is that while you have many individuals, the state of the world is always the same. It's subjective. So, whatever configuration of atoms comprise, what we call life today is objectively the same for every single user, but what changes is their perception of that reality. And that's a core principle that we try to build into Faro, is like, we have this ever expanding pool of data. And so what we are really building is a search engine between, you have this one specific user, and then you have a manifestation of all the things that they find valuable, and you have the end data. And then you have the expression environment, which is financial markets. For us today, we're building this on top of Hyperliquid because it allows such wide access to pretty much all financial markets in a single place. But this Hyperliquid is we're building on top of it for the technology, not because of it. I know Hyperliquid is super cool, where it's also super bullish on Hyperliquid, but it is also like one of the only places where this could be built, because it's one of the only places that actually enables such wide access. So back to my point. So Hyperliquid is the expression environment. And what Faro is building is like, how do you take the end user, and then how do you, over time, with their interactions with the Faro application, build a personalized search engine that takes the user from a simple question like, what is going on with Bitcoin today? Why is Bitcoin down 10%? And then map that question with what that specific user cares about to this ever expanding pool of data that we are that we are collecting underneath. And then how do you then take that data and then represent it back to the user in a way that is going to be maximally useful to that end user? And that pathway and that process is different for every single user. And that's why we come back to Faro as an application is built with its building blocks being the smallest and most indivisible blocks possible. And I'll probably go into this in future videos more, but it's like we have really been taking back everything to its core and being like, how do we represent and build this harness that we're building in a way that really has as many pivot points as possible, such that as the user uses Faro, as they interact with different things, the harness adapts and molds around that specific user. And this is where we stepping back and talking about, okay, what is the business model for us in all of this? It is the construction of this harness. I think what we have seen in the past is that users, and we've actually seen like industry examples of this, right? If you go and use YouTube and you use it for a while, YouTube starts to recommend you videos that you think that it thinks you're going to like. And this is the same problem where YouTube has this exponentially expanding set of like video content, and then how do you encode and take these videos, and then it's same point. It's like what comprises the set of YouTube's videos is always the exact same for every single user, but then what that user receives as the end product is always different, because every single user has a different place in YouTube's search algorithm that ends up recommending them a subset of the ever expanding set of content that is specifically tuned to that user. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with financial data. And then also beyond the recommendation, it is also interpretation as well. And we have multiple parts of the pipeline that all work independently, but also in unison to create this. So yeah, this is a super long-winded video of me rambling, but it's just we've been just so heads down building this, and I wanted to put together a video, hopefully to share why at least we are so excited about this, and hopefully also explain the madness in what we are trying to build. As I think, while it is incredibly ambitious, there's also never ever been another time where all of these stars of on-chain markets, LLMs, decentralized finance have lined up in a way that what we are trying to build today is possible. If you made it to the end, thank you for listening. I will try to keep the future videos shorter. The future videos will be more product-based things, where I will sort of be like, okay, here's the thing that we had in the application that just like wasn't working, and here's how we fixed it. Well, here was our approach to fixing it in a way that aligns with these design principles that we have about taking everything down to its smallest possible atomic component, and then allowing the LLM to then build it back up. It then ultimately, if you have something that has an infinite amount of pivot points, it can then be anything at the end of the day, and it's up to the LLM to then construct it into what that specific end user using Faro wants to see.